A growing number of families in Queensland are being forced to sleep in their cars due to the rental crisis and cost of living. Several councils have implemented new strategies to help, including a sleeping bus and providing shower options. Those affected by the housing crisis are predominantly families and young people. Homeless parents are facing the risk of losing custody of their children. St Vincent de Paul in Queensland has resorted to paying car registration fees to help families stay together. Well, joining me live is Dr. Gabrielle Morrissey, CEO of the not-for-profit organisation Women and Children First on Sydney's northern beaches. Thank you so much, and especially for coming in on Easter Sunday.
My pleasure. It's a really important issue.
It really is, and it's not going anywhere, unfortunately, and it's not just Queensland, as you well know, as you work in the Sydney Northern Beaches area. What are we seeing at the moment? I know you've got a lot of great ideas. Before we get to that, how dire is it?
It's dire. It's as dire here as it is in Queensland. We focus at Women and Children First on mothers escaping domestic abuse and violence with their children. And because our refuges are full and everyone we would refer to is full, that means that when women call, there's really no option for them because we can't move women forward through transitional housing and into rentals. So they're staying in our refuges. So when we get those calls, and we're turning away 10 to 15 women a week. We turned away 8 in one day last week. Their choices are to stay in violence, become homeless, or if they're lucky, sofa surf and move around the best they can. And this is not okay for our children.
It's not okay for our children or for the women. And I mean, this is Australia. This is the northern beaches of Sydney.
Right, and I think that's one of the issues is some of the programs that are available elsewhere and regionally are not available in the entirety of northern Sydney, with the idea that there are somehow geographic areas where domestic violence doesn't affect, and that is just an absolute myth. Domestic violence is everywhere. It affects anywhere between 1 in 4 and 1 in 6 women, so that's everywhere we are, and we've got to solve this housing crisis if we expect women to be able to live in safety with their children.
So what are you proposing?
Well, given the housing crisis, I'm proposing that we get very innovative with the vacant houses that we do have. I'm calling on every developer, the Real Estate Institution of New South Wales. I'm calling on a national summit. I'm calling on every landlord, property owner, and real estate agency to help women experiencing domestic violence and abuse come up to the top of the list with agencies like ours rather than at the bottom of the list so they can escape and come into services through, we have a program that's a pop-up safe house. So we're getting these pop-up safe houses rather than buses and rather than in their cars to be able to have a home for 3, 6, 12 months while we try and figure out what to do with the housing crisis.
It sounds like an amazing idea. What has the response been?
The response has been fantastic. We actually have some philanthropists who are willing to pay. I need to hear more from realtors, real estate companies, and private owners, but we've already started the program with 2 houses, and we're going to grow from there. It's amazing when you ask the right people for help, they're willing to help. I think not enough people realize that women and children are going to be homeless or live in violence. That's where we're at right now. And if we can raise the awareness, then we can start to move the needle a little bit on getting safe accommodation for them.
And what is your opinion on the laws, the current AVOs, for example, and do we need to toughen penalties for perpetrators?
My opinion on the law so far is that it's simply not good enough. None of the laws are fixing the problem the way we want to end gendered violence, particularly in a generation, which is the goal. We cannot do that if we keep displacing children. Ultimately, what I think needs to happen is that women who escape domestic violence need to be able to have the option and the right to return back to their home so children are not moved around. And it's the perpetrator that needs to move out. And then it's easier to find single dwellings and single one-bedroom places for the usually statistically men that are the perpetrators that should be the one that's punished and moved out, and then very severely punished if they breach an exclusion order and come back to that house, making it unsafe for the women and children. It should be straight to jail.
And how is that in terms of perhaps the victim's fear of safety staying there as opposed to somewhere where the perpetrator doesn't know they will be?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that it should be an option. Women should have the choice whether they return back to the home or not. And every circumstance is a little bit different. But we specialize at Women and Children First in single mothers, in mothers escaping, not single women escaping, which is a different scenario. So these are women who end up in the family courts most of the time, what we call parallel parenting or shared parenting with their perpetrator. So more often than not, they already know where the women and children have settled into and moved into after a refuge. So it's just perpetuating the problem and the ongoing costs and continuing gendered violence and the impact of trauma. And I think we should flip that and make the perpetrators keep moving around and searching for housing to deter them and allow women and children to stay in their family home. And the funding that we pour into moving them around and supporting them, we could fund programs that allow them to make their rent and mortgages staying where they are.
And on the perpetrator side as well, if you sort of, not really compare, but you look at what is being spoken about by various politicians and also psychologists and so forth, they're saying that youth crime, for example, needs that holistic approach. It's offending, but it's also rehabilitating and education and so forth. Do you think it's a similar sort of scenario for these perpetrators involved in domestic violence? Do they need to go and get some rehabilitation?
Absolutely. I think between prevention all the way through to recovery, a holistic approach is definitely needed. I think we could start in schools and then we can go all the way to after the fact if the system has failed. And I think that holistic approach is the only way we're going to make a dent in solving the issue of gendered violence and be able to stop that generational trauma. So all the players that are involved all need interventions and education, but I still think the best scenario is if we can keep the children in their communities, women safe, and the punishment where it belongs on the perpetrator.
Yeah, it's as I said, it sounds like a really obvious idea.
Obvious, but it does mean changing the way we do it now. But it's high time that we do that. We just can't keep living in a society where we say that boys will be boys and boys are violent. I refuse to accept that.
Well, certainly through COVID, a lot has changed and we've had to readjust and everything. So, you know, we can do things if we're forced to.
That's exactly right. We've shown we can do it. We've shown we can do it quickly. We've shown we can change attitudes quickly. We just need enough people to advocate alongside us, show us support. And that starts with housing at the moment. That's the most critical piece.
Yeah. And tell us, obviously everybody has a unique story of their own, but how hard is it for a victim to escape from their perpetrator? Because we hear really harrowing stories.
It's very, very hard. And it's very hard for anybody because they're in an intimate partner relationship most of the time. Statistically, that's mostly what's happening in domestic violence. And then when you have women who share children with their perpetrator, that pull to keep returning and keeping that family unit is very, very strong. So unless we have those comprehensive approaches, we do see that return to the ex, return to the home. And that's just another reason why I think we should have women and children home so they're not missing that piece of it and they can learn about boundaries and safety. And, you know, sometimes no relationship is better than a bad relationship, particularly if it's abusive and violent and the children are exposed to it.
You mentioned two very strong words, boundaries and safety, something that is really pertinent to most or all relationships, really. That's what we continue to learn, and perhaps the ones that are dysfunctional, they didn't have the boundaries to start with. Your work, your amazing work there, tell us, you know, if people are listening now and perhaps they are feeling like they need to go and get support. Tell us about your organisation.
Women and Children First has been going for almost 50 years on the northern beaches and expanded up to the lower North Shore. And we do specialize in women at risk of homelessness due to domestic abuse and violence, and especially women with their children. It's a particular kind of service and refuge housing that can take in women who are pregnant, women with newborns, women with all ages of children, because of course navigating the separation and the family court and the court orders, we offer continuous and comprehensive care for 2 years because we know that the trauma is deep and it takes a long time to heal, and you have those trigger moments on birthdays and anniversaries and special occasions, first day of school, when it's really hard to parallel parent with someone that may have been abusive to the woman but not to the children, or even including the children, but the family court has given equal rights, which is another whole issue for another show. But it is a major, it's a major undertaking to change safety for women in this country.
Yeah, really, really important points. And to bring it back, what would be one message that you'd really like to get out today to our viewers?
The main message, I think, is that domestic abuse is very, very common. If you're experiencing it, you're not alone. And help is a phone call away, either Women and Children First or anywhere around the country, 1-800-RESPECT. There are so many that have been where you are that it's just lifting the phone and making that first connection will get help. And if you have an empty property, please consider donating it or renting it out to a service who can help women in that transition period, because they're often the last picked instead of the first in this very competitive rental market.
Well, congratulations on all of the work you do, and we look forward to hearing your ideas and see how they eventuate. Dr. Gabrielle Morrissey, thank you.
Thank you so much.